By midday, Eve's candy shop was usually glowing with customers, chatter, and the smell of sugar. But that morning, before the sign was flipped to open, something impossible had happened. 3 glass jars from the front display were missing. Not cracked, not tipped over, just gone. In their place were tiny sugar crumbs and a shimmering trail of glitter across the floor. Eve stood very still, her teal apron pockets full of lollipops, her clipboard under one arm. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Every window was shut. The back door was locked. She leaned closer to the glitter and frowned. That is not normal candy behavior. A few minutes later, Tommy pushed through the door with a box of napkins. One look at Eve's face made him freeze. "Let me guess," he said. "Another weird candy problem?" Eve pointed to the empty shelf. "Someone, or something, is taking candy," Tommy whispered. "A thief?" "Maybe," Eve said. "Or maybe something stranger." They followed the glitter into the stockroom, past marshmallows, licorice ropes, rainbow drops, and tall sacks of sugar. Behind an old blanket, Eve found a silver wrapper. It was empty, cold, and smelled like peppermint. Inside, one tiny word was printed: invisible. By afternoon, customers filled the shop, and Eve tried to act cheerful, but whenever she turned away, another sweet vanished. A swirl lollipop disappeared. A bag of sour gummies slipped off a shelf. Then a whole tray of chocolate stars was gone. Tommy crouched behind the counter, pretending to sort receipts while watching the floor. "I saw something move," he whispered. "Where?" Eve asked. "Near the gum machine." They stared. Nothing moved. Then one wrapped candy floated down from the top shelf and landed gently on the floor. A soft giggle drifted through the air. Eve's eyes widened, but instead of running, she smiled. "All right," she said. "If you're hungry, you still have to be polite." She placed one chocolate star beside a tiny paper bag. "One treat. Then please return the jars." The shop went silent. The paper bag crinkled by itself. Then, one by one, the missing jars slid back into place. Tommy gasped. Eve folded her arms. "Thank you." A final glittery crumb appeared on the counter, shaped like a smile. From that day on, Eve always left one small candy bag by the register. Eve decided the only way to solve the mystery was to stop the shop for a few minutes and inspect everything. She put up a closed for inventory check sign, locked the front door, and asked Tommy to stand guard while she searched every shelf, jar, and corner. At first, she found nothing. Then, near the candy scales in the back corner, she spotted something strange. Tiny footprints in sugar dust, no bigger than a child's thumbprint. They led behind the old wooden cabinet. Eve pushed it aside and found a narrow crack in the wall. Inside was a hidden hollow between the walls. Not quite a room, but big enough for someone small to crawl through or hide in. Eve knelt, shone her flashlight inside, and saw wrappers, crumbs, and a little pile of stolen sweets arranged like treasure. Then a voice whispered from the darkness, "Please don't be angry." Eve nearly dropped the flashlight. A tiny figure stepped into the light. It was about the size of a teacup, with a round face, silver hair, and a coat made from folded candy wrappers. It held a marshmallow in both hands like a jewel. Tommy blinked. What is that?" The creature bowed nervously. "I am called Pip," it said. "I did not mean to steal so much." Eve didn't shout or call for help. She knelt and studied Pip. His shoes were dusty, his hands sticky with sugar, and his face looked more guilty than dangerous. "Why were you taking the candy?" Eve asked. Pip stared at the floor. "I live behind the shop. My family has hidden in the wall tunnels for many years. The sweets smelled wonderful. We only wanted a few." Eve folded her arms. "A few?" Pip nodded miserably. "We meant to return them, but the invisible candy made our tunnels hard to notice. Then we got hungry, and then we forgot." Eve listened. Then she noticed Pip was trembling, not just from fear, but cold. The space behind the wall was dark and damp. "How many of you are there?" she asked. 6, Pip said. "My mother, my grandfather, and 3 little ones." Eve thought, The shop had lost candy, yes, but it was sheltering a whole family. She looked at Tommy, who shrugged helplessly. "I think," Eve said slowly, "we need a better plan than calling the police." Pip's eyes widened with hope. That evening, after closing time, Eve carried a plate of ordinary sweets into the stockroom and placed it near the crack in the wall. Then she came back with a blanket, a tiny cup of warm milk, and a notebook. Pip peeked out first. Then the others followed. There was a small grandmother with a striped scarf, a serious-looking father, and 3 children who stared at the candy shop like it was a palace. Eve learned that they had lived in the hidden wall passages for years, moving from building to building, surviving on crumbs and anything they could find. Eve listened carefully, then made a decision. "You can't keep stealing from the shop," she said, "but I won't leave you hungry either." Pip looked up at her with huge eyes. "I'll make a deal," Eve said. "You return what you took, and in return, I'll leave a small tray of safe sweets in the back room every night. No stealing, no trouble." The tiny family whispered among themselves, then agreed immediately. Tommy, standing beside the doorway, stared in disbelief as Pip's family carried back the missing candy in careful little trips. They placed the jars on the counter one by one, like they were returning royal treasures. Eve laughed under her breath. Of all the shop problems she had faced, this one was the most unusual, and somehow the most heartwarming. By the end of the night, the missing sweets were back on the shelves, and a new tray was waiting quietly in the back room. Eve locked the shop, turned off the lights, and looked at the little crack in the wall one last time. The candy shop was no longer just a store. It was becoming a place where hidden worlds met, and Eve was the one keeping everything from falling apart.